Aloha, friends. This season of the Voyagers podcast is brought to you by our friend Jonathan Udis, a realtor and real estate advisor at Maui Dream Properties. So, quick question. How's winter going? I'm not trying to be mean. Trust me, I'm cool with winter. Our guest today on the show is from the Arctic, but if you've had your fill of cold and dark winters, you might be thinking about relocation. Maybe a tropical island is in your future? If that's the case and you've got Maui on your mind, you'll want to go to MauiDreamProperties.com and drop Jonathan Udis a note of hello. Whether buying or selling or investing, Jonathan will help you navigate the real estate market on Maui because without exception, he serves his clients with passion, enthusiasm, and excellence. You can trust him to put you and your family's needs first. If you're thinking about moving to one of the most beautiful islands in the world, check out MauiDreamProperties.com, drop Jonathan a hello, and get started on making your dreams a reality. I'm David Glenn Taylor, and this is the Voyagers Podcast. What do you think about when you hear the word cancer? I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who hasn't been affected by it, either directly or indirectly. It touches all of us. A decade ago, I was diagnosed with cancer myself. I did my treatments, I got through it. It was a treatable form, and I've been cancer-free since. You can say I got off easy, except every cancer survivor will tell you some horror stories. I'm no different. There's still memories and emotions that I feel when I think back on it. But as we all know, there are those of us who really get put through the ringer. My friend Dirk was diagnosed with AML just over 3 years ago. That's Acute Myeloid Leukemia. The cancer and the ensuing treatments and secondary sicknesses have wreaked havoc on his body and his mind and his spirit. And of course, he hasn't been alone in this fight as his wife and kids in his community have gone through the ringer with him. It's been a rough go, and he's still working through it. I wanted to talk to Dirk and hear his story because, well, he has a perspective that most of us can't get close to. By definition, when you deal with a life-threatening disease, you are forced to wrestle with questions and concepts that are just off limits to those of us who are healthy. And in my experience, the wisdom garnered from this is priceless. So I asked if Dirk would share a bit of his story and what he's learned about life and about love and about faith and about death as well. He graciously obliged.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. How are you?
It's been too long.
It's been a while since we saw each other face to face. It was last time you were here in Hawaii.
Exactly, and that was pretty much overnight, and then you guys were gone. So that was the beginning of October 2018.
Holy cow! Yeah, it's funny. COVID kind of stole a year.
Yeah.
It did. Except for I'm going to ask you about that later because I'm curious about how the experience has been for you in terms of, because it stole a year for everybody. Everybody's, whining about not being able to travel and blah, blah, blah and stuff like that. But for you, you're still going through all your treatments and you've been having a year. How's Stacy? How are the kids?
She's good. What I tell folks is she's good. She's great. And then when people like you ask, and I know you want more than that, I say this too. I say, you know what, Stacy she's the rock. Mm-hmm. On which this family is built. She is the one when it all falls apart, and it does, that everyone relies on. Me, the kids. And so when the shifting sand of my health does what it does, she's the one who picks up all the pieces. Right. And so I say all those things, and they're all true, but this is also true. What happens to rock when enough water runs over it? What happens when enough ice forms? And so, as we know, you take a look at the cliff of a waterfall, it erodes, it recedes. Right. So when I say that to close friends who ask, I say, so whatever we can do, you can do, I can do to keep those river waters away, even for a little bit, it's helpful, right? Yeah. So that duality of she's amazing. she's doing well. And yet there's the reality of what this is and what this does to us, and the trauma of having a spouse or a parent who's ill and whose health is always in question. It manifests itself in different ways. It's very interesting, and it shows itself at different times and in different ways, beyond the usual, beyond the expected, beyond the crisis. And I think we have yet to fully understand all that. But she's doing well. I mean, that's my longish answer to your shortish question.
No, that's great for podcasting, man. Longish answers are welcome here. Yeah. How are you doing physically? And are you seeing any light at the end of the tunnel here?
For the audience, let me give just a little bit of backstory to that. So I was diagnosed in January of 2018, January 8th, actually, with acute myeloid leukemia. I had been not feeling well for a couple of, maybe 10 days before. In fact, I can tell you on December 28th, I was out shooting with a friend of mine. We were just shooting targets and shooting skeet or something, just frogging around. And I remember feeling ill starting that day. I could feel a hollowness in my lungs, and my legs, I thought I had the flu, but then my throat hurt. I had shivers, I had sweats, I had all these weird symptoms. And so I went in that Saturday for, I think that time it was strep throat, and it came back negative. And I thought, oh, no problem. I just got to get over this. And I had another week of Christmas break, and I was in bed all the time. I just got sicker and sicker, and went in that Friday, the next Friday for mono, because I couldn't get out of bed, and it was negative, but they did a blood draw. And so that Sunday, I was supposed to go to a family reunion, couldn't get out of bed. And so Stacy and the kids went, and my phone rang at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But before that, this is really interesting. Before that, I had taken a nap, and I had woken up, and I heard this voice in my head, not out loud, nothing like that, but in my head, ask me, how many more times do you think you're going to get up? How many more times do you think you can get up with this?
Right.
What I hadn't really told anyone was that I had noticed that my gums were bleeding.
Interesting.
I was developing pink spots in my eyes. I couldn't see well. And so that phone call came at like 5, 6 o'clock at night. And it was the company that had done the blood work and said, you have a serious problem in your blood. You have got to get to the ER right now.
Wow.
That's what I'm talking about. Your white blood counts are through the roof. Whatever the normal range was, mine was like 20 times higher.
Right.
Then let's say the normal is like 11,000. Mine was 180,000.
Right.
So I called Stacy, said, I don't know what's going on. I just got this call. And so she took me to the ER. They immediately took one look at my blood work, and I can give you the name. I'm not going to, but like the ER doctor who came to me, she was about our age, a little older. And she grabbed my hand, and with tears in her hand, and she said, I think you have leukemia. And I thought, that's great. I knew all kinds of people who had chronic leukemia.
Mm-hmm.
She said, that's not what you have.
Right.
We suspect it's acute myeloid leukemia. I can't diagnose it here. We're going to transfer you to Butterworth, Grand Rapids, and good luck. And she did it so well.
Sure.
I'll never forget her. So long story made short, I was transferred by ambulance. I was sent to Butterworth. She was right, and they started chemo, and there's all of that. So I spent about the next 6 weeks in the hospital, had a really adverse reaction to the chemo, but survived it. That's another story. But survived it, and then in April had some more chemo later on for consolidation, number of transfusions, whatever. And then in April we did the transplant, which was an allo, which it means because of the gene mutation, we couldn't do it. Right. And so we had to go international to get a donor. Because there wasn't anyone in the family, even though I have a twin brother like you. He and I are fraternal. So he was 5 of 5, or 5 of 10.
Right.
Sister was 5 of 10. And so we had to go international, and we found someone who was 12 of 12. And we think Germany. I still haven't made contact with that person yet. So there's all that. So that's kind of the story of that. Mm-hmm. And then we've been alluding to, and so that donation went quite well. The engraftment went really well.
Yeah.
Part of that process is you have to completely, or as much as possible, wipe out the old immune system. Right. So you've got to survive both that chemo and then not having an immune system, right, which is a and then you've got to survive the transplant, the engraftment. And then there's the chance that you may have a form of rejection. And any kind of transplant, you have a form of rejection, right? Like lungs, heart, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, what happens when the donated organ or system is actually your immune system, like me?
Right.
That's what I have. And what it is the graft, that new immune system wakes up and says, wait a minute, this is not the body I was in.
Right.
What is this place? And starts freaking out and starts attacking everything, particularly the larger organs. And that's the versus host part of the
Sure.
GD. And that's exactly what happened to me. About 6 months out, I started to get itches, bumps, itchy. I had already cleared our trip to Hawaii with my team. And so I was coming down with this like the week before. And they highly suspected that's what it was. So they set me up with all kinds of steroids and said, go.
Yeah.
If you develop any, but here's the thing, you develop any problems, don't go to the Maui hospital. You need to go to Honolulu. That is the only hospital you can go to.
Yeah. That's true.
That's kind of hard to know. Anytime I get sick, it's not any hospital. I have to go to a BMT and quit.
Yeah.
So we went, and I can tell you all kinds of stories about what it's like, and Stacy probably more, what it's like to travel with somebody who's super high on steroids. It's crazy. And then when I got back, then I got formally diagnosed with GVHD and have been diagnosed with it. As I said, my skin, my liver, and my colon. And there have been other complications as well. I went from an able-bodied, normal-looking guy to a cancer patient who barely survived, to a person who has a twin brother, but actually is genetically similar to a stranger somewhere in Germany, probably.
Sure.
To now a 48-year-old man with a cane disability sticker hanging on his mirror, who is disabled and no longer is currently employed because of that. Those are facts. Those are what happened. It's so interesting. I actually had a shirt on for you for this yesterday that I had picked up, and I need to find one for you. And it says simply, "This is what a cancer survivor looks like."
Yeah.
And I saw it in a store, and I of course burst into tears. And then and I said to Stacy, I don't care. I'm buying it. So I was gonna quote flash you yesterday, but I wore it yesterday.
I want to see a picture of that with you on it.
No, dude, totally. Because my beach bod right now is a mess. So the t-shirt will be helpful for all of us.
Yeah, dude.
But also yesterday, and I was really excited to tell you this, I had an oncology appointment, just a 6-month checkup. And I hadn't seen my oncologist, like I said, in at least 6 months, probably longer. And even though that office is in the same building as my BMT, I'm going to use a lot of acronyms, so let me explain if you
do it. That's
cool. Bone marrow transplant is BMT. Those are the folks who oversee all the things that I'm dealing with because of my transplant that I had in April of 2018, and we can go into why of all that. So anyway, I was in the office, the oncology office, and she sat me down, and my numbers were pretty good. And said, last month we crossed the 3-year threshold. I said, I know. And I had remembered a number of things about what that meant. I knew that was a big deal.
Sure.
But what I have found along the way is just because I remember that, or because I was even told something, things have a way of shifting. And so she sat me down and said, what that means is, in all likelihood, statistically, AML is probably out of your life. That, I was facing basically the odds of, for the last 3 years, AML, acute myeloid leukemia, will return at a rate of about 50-50.
Yeah.
A 1-in-1 shot or 1-in-2 shot that had come back, despite my bone marrow transplant. And I found out later, because I have a certain mutation called FLEET3, which is quite aggressive as well. Acute myeloid leukemia is, but this is an even more aggressive variant, that it was probably better than 50-50 that it was going to return. And so for her to tell me that, and essentially I was just floored. I wasn't expecting that good news.
Yeah.
And I asked specifically about FLT3. I said, what about that? I mean, she goes, actually, because it is so aggressive, statistically, and in my own experience, it would have shown up sooner than it was going to show up. And again, that doesn't rule out that it could come back. I mean, there's always that possibility. And it doesn't take away the GVHD, again, another acronym, which is graft versus host disease. It doesn't take away that, and it doesn't take away the complications that have arisen because of all the treatments I've been on.
Sure.
But you know what? It's one less thing. You know, instead of Stacy, put that on the small print on the list of things that'll probably kill me. Like now that goes in the small print, we can take it out of bold. It doesn't have to be on the front.
What does that do? So for you to hear that, I mean, I remember when I heard that from my doctor, you know, that looks like, you know, you made it out. There was a kind of relatively high chance of this certain cancer coming back inside my chest, you know, and he was like, but if we get past, he would always give me, you know, if you get past this point and it hasn't come back, the percentages start to drop. And by the time you get to 5 years and it goes, then you're pretty much, you know, scot-free. And I didn't have a lot of the complications that you've had, you know, in post thing, but I remember hearing that when he went, yeah, I think you're good. And I was like, it was something in my brain that had been so dedicated. It was like almost like this subconscious portion of my brain had been just kind of siphoned off to go, you're going to spend the next however many years just thinking about cancer and worrying about it or freaking, you know what I mean? Or, you know, you're going to do that. And then all of a sudden that part was like, there was a little, I got to admit this, there was a little bit of, oh yes. And then there was also a little bit of like, what do I do with that part of my brain? Like kind of experience?
I do. And I think the answer to that is I'm still figuring that out.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it takes time. Yeah.
Part of me, of course, overjoyed. I mean, I left the office and I looked every single patient in that office who was looking up in the eye and secretly wished them to have the same kind of visit.
Yeah.
Like, I was just like, I wish this for you. I hope that you hear this news. And I like just every single one, like who would look up. And then I sat in the hallway and I bawled my eyes out.
Yeah. I did the same thing.
I bawled my eyes out and I called Stacy and unfortunately she didn't answer. So I texted her and I sat down and I bawled my eyes out and I got in my truck and I bawled my eyes out. And it's, you know, where my appointments are, it's about 45, 50 minutes from where we live. And I've really come to depend on that commute. It's a really good commute for me to sort a lot of stuff out. And so I immediately went to Stacy's work and I texted her and I said, I have to see you. Yeah. Like, I can't just go home and pretend that this is normal. And so I did. And her office all knew by the time I got there. And
nice.
It was a beautiful moment. Great news, fantastic. Yeah. And yet there's a part of me that says, we'll see. Yeah. You know, okay, great. But so and that's part of the tension and part of the difficulty of living with cancer, but also long-term chronic disease. I don't remember hearing much about it or reading much about it, but the idea of dealing with the vacillating emotions and keeping your eye on hope, but also and not only when it comes to the medical aspect of your body, but really the spiritual life as well. And where do you focus your time and your attention? We all know people who focus on the present at the expense of the future, or vice versa. And it's difficult to know where to spend your time and your thought and your energy. And how do you manage all of that with the conflicting emotions and the whirlwind? People call it a roller coaster. A roller coaster is something I get on for fun. And a roller coaster has rails, and I can see where it's going to go. And I understand the analogy, but I think it's more like being on a ship at sea and the rudder just got ripped off and the sails have been thrown overboard and you've got no idea where you're going anymore or what's coming. And that's more what it feels like. Some days it's calm, it's gorgeous. Yeah. And other days it's the opposite and they switch like that. Yeah. And so what do you focus on? So that's what I'm feeling with that news. Now, you had asked me earlier, how am I doing? The reality is it's up and down. You know, today I woke up, for example, and I felt pretty good. By about 11 o'clock, I was struggling. I had to cancel something this afternoon. I took a nap instead, and now I seem to be rallying. I've had a couple of good days where I've been able to work in my shop, and you'll get a kick out of this, built a table, you know? And then other days I'll have a hard time getting out of bed. And that's my reality. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. But overall, to give you kind of a clinical, if you will, thing, I've had a number of blood draws recently. And so we're always looking at white blood cells, hematocrit, hemoglobin, white blood cells being the markers for leukemia in the normal range. Also looking at liver functions, because that is an organ that really took the hit, both for chemo as well as my graft versus host disease, and has been struggling ever since then, pretty much since I was in and left Hawaii. I mean, it was the one that struggled with chemo, and then all along was a second organ diagnosed with GVHD after the skin, because I broke out in the telltale rash, and it's outside so you can tell. And that's pretty much in the normal range now.
Sure.
My last CAT scan said it was normal size, which is
nice.
New, because it was a fatty liver, which means inflamed.
Right.
So from a BMT, a bone marrow transplant team perspective, I'm doing really well. But I still have this abdominal swelling for the last 3 months that we're going to try and figure out with GI that doesn't seem to be related, but it's a pain. I still have probably permanent neuropathy and maybe some myopathy from the ankles down, and that's nerve and muscle damage.
Sure. Yeah.
From either chemo or the high level of steroids I was on and am on.
Yeah.
You can see it in my face. I'm weak physically. I walk with a cane now almost all the time. I've gotten used to that.
Sure. I mean, in terms of the hope that you have, is the hope to come back to not walking with a cane? Is that what you're aiming for?
Certainly that was our prayer from the very beginning, to be completely restored. That was my intent. In fact, when we left Hawaii, it was my plan, and we had a plan for me to return to work within a week of me coming back.
Yeah.
And I had an appointment that Thursday after we got back. I think we got back on a Monday.
Yeah.
And my numbers were sky high. Were bad. And essentially my graft versus host disease that we had suspected was running rampant. It was all over my skin. It was all over my liver. And my doctor said, number one, I'm doubling your steroid. And therefore you are so medically fragile. You have no place anywhere near kids. He kept calling them germ factories. And I said, we call them children. In education, we call them kids. But he's like, you can't go back to work. And that was an incredibly difficult ride home. I was by myself. For some reason, we had borrowed my dad's Suburban, and I was driving home by myself. Stacy had driven me, but she drove to pick up the kids, and I drove my dad's Bourbon home. And I can tell you right where I was. And all of a sudden, I started shouting in the truck, shouting at God, "What are you doing?
Right.
Why are you taking this away from me? Like, don't you know the plans that I have? Like, don't you know what it is I want?"
Right.
And it was in speaking it out loud that I heard the pronouns I was using. Me, my, I. I stopped mid-sentence and I asked myself, do you have any idea what the Lord wants for you? Tears streaming down my face, my mouth wide open. I realized I didn't. I had no idea. I thought I did. I thought this was supposed to be what I like to call a glory story. It's the stories that in the Christian world we like to talk about and we like to tell because they're clean and they're easy and they're neat and there's a happy ending and everything gets wrapped up nice and maybe we can even use the word miracle, right? And those happen and I know they're true. But I also know that there are other stories too. And those stories aren't always stories of immediate healing. Those aren't always stories of quick endings. And for the now, it seems to be one that I'm living. So to answer your question, do I hope to be restored? The answer, of course, is yes. Do I hope to be completely restored? Yes. We're into our 4th year now. And so like the earlier part of when you asked me about, cancer coming back, yes, there's happiness and joy, and then there's the reality of skepticism and we'll see. Well, that's here too.
So you mentioned your faith and as a Christian. How has that changed?
Yeah, I was hoping you'd ask that question because I figured that's what we would talk about. But I know you'll appreciate this. There are 2 things there's a quote by Tolkien that I was brought aware of by Stephen Colbert in an interview with Anderson Cooper. And you know the one. If there's anything I'd have tattooed on my body, it'd be this. What punishments of God are not gifts. So you ask me, what has this done? And I think initially in those first 6 months, like particularly as we were in Hawaii, I remember feeling like, and again, this is a Tolkien reference. I don't know why, but it just fits. There's that scene in Fellowship of the Ring, and I used to say this to myself out loud, where Frodo is hanging out essentially with Galadriel, and he offers her the ring, and she transforms in front of him. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she transforms in front of him in a way that is frightening to them both. And she trans
Yeah.
She becomes, as she quotes, "I'll be as terrible as the dawn,
Right.
as tempestuous as the sea. All will fear me and despair, or love me and despair."
Right.
Right? Duality. And then when she comes down off of that, it doesn't snatch the ring from his hand or accept that poison, right? That powerful. She murmurs, "I passed the test. I am," I'm adding words now, but I am who I always thought I was.
Yeah.
I was able to do. And I remember feeling that. I used to say those words, "I passed the test."
Yeah.
I went through the cauldron of fire that is chemo and cancer and didn't lose myself or my faith. I didn't lose in the pit of despair. And there are many nights of despair and many days of despair, and they still happen. I don't know that it's ever a destination. There are still dark days, but I felt that very, very, very much. So I think it's deepened it, David. It hasn't changed it, but I think it's deepened it. It's ironic because my world has shrunk in so many ways. I was a middle school principal. I'm not. I used to be surrounded by kids and people and in charge. I'm not. I used to XYZ, fill in the blank. I'm none of those things now. I like to say, when people really want to know, "How are you doing?" That's a loaded question. Sometimes people just want nice sound bites. So I'll usually say to them, "Well, I'm here." And that's not a small thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of my nice answer. My other answer is this, and this one's true. I'm a fraction of what I was and more of who I am. And I'm trying to live into that contradiction every day.
I think this was what I was thinking about because it is a contradiction. I mean, you have, in terms of a person's faith or beliefs, or you have a faith in a religion or a theology or kind of what's going to happen after I die. You're going to have those things. But the living part of it is that you live in a conflict, especially for us here in America or in Europe or whatever. When in Christianity itself, there's all kind. We have a pretty strong and dominant narrative about what happens after you die.
Yep.
But when you're living with it here, you have the hope that you're not going to die, and then you're going to continue to live and watch your kids grow up, and you're going to go through that experience. So hope, realism, rationality, all these conflicts, and then a belief that there's a God that does miracles and loves us all. And there's all these things. They're all swimming in the same soup. And when you go through it long enough, you kind of learn to, I guess, just enjoy the aroma of the soup, I guess. I don't know. That's probably a bad metaphor, but
I don't know. Do you enjoy it or do you get used to it?
that's the question. I think that's an individual question. That's the thing, is like, where are you at in that space? Because you get used to it. But I think that, I mean, obviously, if you talk to a Buddhist, whatever, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, no, the idea is to enjoy it." Right. Some Zen experience of this thing. But doesn't seem to be what people actually go through,
And I'm not a Buddhist.
Yeah.
But the idea, I've always been attracted to some of the ideas, and the way to go with it is to separate, right? It's to you end suffering by letting go. Yeah, that's a whole nother topic for us.
No. I want to hear like what that experience has been like for you.
Okay, we're going to get into it. I'll show it to you. I'm in the middle of writing right now. I've got pages and pages, and I wasn't sure if it was going to fit with this podcast, but I'm going to give you another story.
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
This kind of goes right into this. I alluded to the physically letting go of some of the, I don't want to call them goals, but benchmarks of, I'll know I've arrived when.
Sure.
And I don't think I ever really said those out loud, and yet I held on to those things.
Sure.
In fact, I'm sitting right next to my road bike. I'm in our office downstairs, sitting on a trainer. I set it up a couple weeks ago. Man, I haven't been on it.
Right.
Like, it's sitting here though because it's something that was a part of me, and it was a part of what I used to do. And man, if I ride 5 miles on that thing, that'd be a miracle. Not a miracle. That'd be a huge accomplishment right now.
Sure.
I didn't used to get suited up for less than 20.
Right.
I mean, 2 miles is a waste of my time. So all that's to say, I think this comes from something else entirely. Approximately a year ago, I was just out of the hospital. I had a rough February and March of 2020, even before COVID. February, I was admitted into the hospital with I was feeling run down. I had a procedure or surgery, I can't recall, in December of 2019. I think I had my gallbladder removed or something, because it was acting up, and some doctor of my liver was giving me some business. So that was then, and I never really got stronger. Like January and February were rough. And of 2020, turns out I was fighting a couple forms of influenza, and I was dealing with some other infection. Oh, and I had a pulmonary embolism that nobody knew. right?
Right.
So we found that one because they thought I had pneumonia. It turns out it was this huge blood clot, like sitting right in the saddle between the two. And most of the folks didn't think I was going to make it through the surgery, but I did. And the days after, though, because of the amount of blood thinners I was on, because of the steroids, the thinness of my skin, because of just the nature of my physical condition, I just bled. I bled and I bled, both from the incision site as well as I bumped myself and skin would tear off. Or you'd have a tech or a nurse forget about my skin because I was on a different floor and not my BMT floor, and they'd put regular tape on and it'd tear skin off. I mean, it was a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there, I think, on that floor for 6 or 7 days, and I bled. And I just grew weaker and weaker. I was literally bleeding out my strength. And a couple of days into that, maybe 3 or 4, I remember Stacy came to see me, and we had a frank talk. And I said to her in January of 2018, and that was, I'll do everything to stay alive for you and the kids. I will go through whatever it takes. I'm not afraid to die. I do believe in life after death. I do believe in that, in heaven. I do believe in all of that. But I will do everything I can to stay alive because I want to be your husband and I want to be our kid's father. So don't doubt that, you know. However, I'm not sure how long I can keep doing this. I'm not sure how much strength I have left to keep doing. And it wasn't the first time that I had felt that. I had days of that earlier, but this was different. When I was alone, I came away from that experience. And so I did survive, obviously, but I came away from that experience and I knew something had changed. It took me 12 months to figure it out. I've been wrestling this weight of what was that? What did I experience? What did I see? How do I articulate what changed in me? I couldn't figure out if something in that vulnerability, and I called it hanging in the veil between life and death. And I was just hanging there. And my will didn't matter. My mindset didn't matter. The promises I had made to Stacy and the kids didn't matter. It was beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a place beyond that for the really kind of the first time where I knew I was just wavering. And what shook me so much was that I claimed I saw, I didn't have a vision or anything, but I felt the veil between that life and death separate. Mm-hmm. And underneath was this divine, was God. And also, and here's the thing that shook me, this feeling of peace and rest. And for the first time, it was really, really attractive. Mm. It was really attractive. It was calling to me. Mm-hmm. And it still is. Mm-hmm. You know, this idea and this belief that I have that there is something beyond, and it's not a bad place. It is a place of peace. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know how to articulate that. I didn't know how to say that. I didn't know how to admit that I was attracted to that. I didn't know how to say that, or I wasn't ready to say what I just said to you. Mm-hmm. And that is that it was a place that was attractive because I couldn't put it into words until just like I said, just recently, just in the last 3-4 weeks. And that has been interesting as well, and strangely lightening. I've been dealing with the last, like I said, 12 months of just running. And I do this every day. I think of these people every day and those who have been along with me on the cancer walk and who have passed. I think of them every day. Every time there's a new cancer diagnosis, you know, I'm like, oh, it just burdens you, right? Like, not because it's you, but because it is someone else. And you have an inkling. Every kind of cancer journey is different, but you have an inkling of what they're going to go through. Not maybe all the physical stuff, radiation, whatever, that can be different, surgery that can be different, but the heavy lifting, the spiritual and the emotional and the mental, and as you said, the existential, it's heavy and it's worthy, but it's heavy stuff. So you feel for them in that, for their spouses, for their families, for their community, and you want to be a part of that as much as you can, as much as they want, because that's important. But each person has to do this themselves. No one can do that for them. And it is ultimately an individual journey. And that can be frightening too. Yeah. So all of that to say, I've come to terms with, or at least as much as I possibly can, with the idea that as much as possible, I think I saw death and it changed me. Mm-hmm. It changed me in a way that I realize now, I've realized after that experience, I realized why people give up. I didn't know that before. I couldn't understand it before. As I said, my personality is such that to give in is to give up. And when it comes to cancer, I found quite the opposite. I had to do the opposite. I had to be black and white, binary, win or lose. And I got to a point, though, in that experience where I realized that it is not about that for me. It's no longer about that for me. And that it might not be that for everyone. And I understand why people give up, and that I could too. I understand why people maybe break, and that I could be broken too. And that has been really humbling. It's been really difficult. It's also been really liberating as well. I don't carry the weight like I was 4 or 5 weeks ago, wondering when my number is going to come up, wondering when it's my turn.
Can I talk Tolkien a little bit?
Please.
Okay. As you know, I'm a fan. Tolkien was a Roman Catholic, right? A very devout Roman Catholic. So he had a kind of a Catholic worldview, but with the war that he went through, it really changed a lot of his perspectives and influenced, his writings, hugely, of course. I mean, he was a signalman on the Western Front in the Great War, and he, lost almost all of his friends. I think there was like 18 housemates of his, I think he was the only one who survived. I don't know if you've seen the biopic Tolkien. You should pick it up if you get a chance and watch it. It's good. It was good. It's a good film, and it's not completely factual, but I enjoyed it a lot. One of the things that, though, if you get into the kind of the prehistory, the first and second age, and all those, the Silmarillion and some of his more kind of intense writings, past Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, there's this notion that the elves were created first, right? In this world, in Middle Earth, the elves were created and they were immortal. And so they were the most beautiful and they were the most gifted and the most talented and blah, blah, blah. But that the men, and this kind of goes back to what you were talking about in the quote from Tolkien, the men were given the greater gift, and that was death. The price for that gift was that you didn't know, that faith was required to understand, but that was the actual gift. And so that it's secretly the elves were jealous. That their immortality, they would flaunt that over men. And you still see that you even see it in The Hobbit, in the film, The Hobbit, when the hobbits are captured by Thranduil and in Mirkwood and stuff, you see this, I'm immortal, I can live forever and blah, 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 blah. But there was this secret jealousy embedded in that understanding of, well, where do they go? What do they have? What happens to them after? And that it was the only thing that Tolkien never flushed out, because he flushed out what happens to an elf if an elf dies, if he's like killed in Middle Earth. He goes to the Hall of Mandos, one of the Valar, and he hangs out there in contemplation for a while, and then gets to hang out in the Undying Lands for the rest of his life, and everything's great. Kind of sell it, but it was pretty much like, okay, you just kind of get transported to a place where there's, everybody's good. But we don't know what happened to men. He never illustrated that idea. And I think what you were saying right there, this idea that the unknown is kind of the scary part, Shakespeare called it, the fear of the undiscovered country, right? In Hamlet's favorite soliloquy, he talked about that. And that we have this thing that we are either afraid of, the undiscovered country, or we begin to understand as the counterweight to our experience here on Earth, in which we can kind of go, because that's there. If the fear is lifted, as it seems it's been with you, now I get to kind of live even more present here. I get to be, more in this experience here.
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of that. And I think it's too, it's for me, it was helpful to differentiate between, okay, am I just hanging out of the darkness because I don't know anything else? Because this has been kind of rough.
Right.
It's been a tough 3 years.
Yeah.
Or is it, and I believe it's this, is it because of that peace, I yearn for that?
Yeah.
And that is partly who I am, and in my faith, that's part of that connection with the Lord and with God. And why wouldn't I?
Mm-hmm.
He's my creator and my sustainer and the deliverer of my soul, as I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't I got to see that? And I have seen that over and over, and not just in the crisis. I need to make sure I say this. Not just in that crisis, but over and over. It just reinforced what I've seen in the hands and feet of people who have been a part of our lives in ways David, I can't begin, but I'm going to try to describe. Our good friend, family, our good friend Theo. I can tell you stories of how he and others, my brother, obviously Stacy and Theo, they were not the only ones. They were really the core of who they'd sleep over, because I couldn't go through the night. I was that fragile. And even though there was healthcare staff there, they would sleep there. And if I needed to use the bathroom, it was pretty immediate, and I couldn't always count on a tech to get to my room fast enough. And so they were there. People from Rehoboth would come up to the hospital. They come here. They come to our house. The meals, the way that people brought the kids. I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to be the recipient of that kind of love over and over and over again, that you know you didn't deserve. And so that experience that I alluded to after that pulmonary embolism, and then coming to terms with, I think it was finding and seeing a rest that was so attractive that I couldn't shake it. You know, it bothered me. Even though I thought that there was something wrong and broken in me, that I had lost something. I don't think that was it at all. It was instead because it changed my attitude on how to encounter this now. And as a result, I've seen it over and over. This love that doesn't match up with what we're told, what we believe in life, what mainstream dominant society tells us. You got to earn it. It's a meritocracy, hierarchy, blah, blah, blah. What happens when that gets shattered and people show you something else and the Lord shows you something else? Well, you have nowhere else to go but to either deny that it happened and just pretend that it's business as usual, or to look at a different way of living, or a different way of looking at your situation. And I haven't needed to take a different way of life, but it certainly has helped me look at my situation differently.
Are you thinking, because you've done a lot of writing, and you're writing when you write your posts in your Facebook support group, they're long and they're extremely well written. Are you thinking about trying to kind of compile this experience a bit?
Yeah, I'm actually working on it, and I'm on my third draft of it. I am. Yes, yeah. I've got a number of different ideas. I put some feelers out there with some friends who have published, and I've had some meetings with them. It's slow going, but really, 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 really valuable. So yes, I'm hoping to do something with it. I am working on a book. I do some outside writing that I'm piling into folders on my Google Drive. I've started a couple other book ideas, both on paper and in my head. I just need to work harder at it.
Hey, I hope you let me design the cover for it.
Dude, you're on.
I would absolutely love that. I'd love to do that. That'd be amazing.
But thank you for asking.
At the end of the show, I usually ask a guest to leave a blessing with the audience.
I do have one, and this is something I say. So we have 3 children: Aiden, who's 18, who's a senior; Teddy, who you met when he was a baby. He's about to start driving; and Olivia, who you haven't met. She's going to turn 12 next month. And I don't know when this started, but Olivia and I say this to each other every night, and this blessing means a great deal. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you his peace. Amen.
Well, my friend, thank you. Thanks for spending the time. Please give Stacy a big hug for us. And
all right. Hey, thank you, Dave. I really appreciate you asking. Honestly, it's I'm so thankful that you did.
Yeah. This was fun. I really I appreciate this. I'm gonna start editing right away. This will be out on Tuesday. And
send me a link when it's done. I'll put it on the Facebook page.
Okay, will do. Thanks,
Please.
man.
I did.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.
The Voyagers podcast is produced by Sugar Sled Productions in Kula on the island of Maui. It's hosted by me, David Glenn Taylor. One last thing I want to say. Dirk, my friend, if you're listening, please know that we love you and we're fighting with you in spirit. Thank you for sharing your story and what you've learned, and we can't wait to be able to give you a hug sometime soon. Little shout out to Stacy for her strength, and to our friends Theo and Carol and all the people who have shown love and support to the Hollebeek family during these past 3 years. It's love, and it's the best thing about this life. It's worth celebrating every day. You can support the podcast through Patreon by going to voyagerspodcast.com, clicking on the Patreon link, We got one more episode this season, and then we'll be back in the fall. If you'd like to sponsor, just email us, david@voyagerspodcast.com. Next week, it's the Season 2 finale, and this is a big one for me personally. If there's one writer who has influenced my life over the last decade, it's this guy. He's a spiritual teacher, speaker, filmmaker, and New York Times best-selling author. I mean, the dude toured with Oprah, for crying out loud. He's my final guest of the season, the man, the legend, Rob Bell. That's next week on the Voyagers Podcast. Mahalo for listening, friends.